I think art is a beautiful thing. Painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, music, animation, film, it's all beautiful. It's the most effective way that we as a species are able to convey messages that transcend the bounds of mere information. Morals, emotions, philosophies, connections. I believe that art is crucial to the human condition. In our modern day, it has never been easier to create. Advances in technology have made things like 3D modeling, music production, animation, and drawing accessible to just about anyone with a computer and an internet connection. Generative models allow people to generate images that they never could have drawn without decades of persistent training and have trivialized things like correcting grammatical errors or rewording prose for concision. Models can even generate entire narratives, song lyrics, and musical compositions based on a few text prompts. Yet I don't think it's a hot take to say that there's something fundamentally unfulfilling about the current offerings of our modern media landscape. Through all the noise and the racket of the culture wars, I think that all the complaints about the landscape all eventually boil down to spouting roughly the same thing. As a humble insomniac, I wanted to take a swing at providing a unified mental framework for assessing creative work through the lens of butter and biscuits. There's this scene in the episode Dungeon Train from Season 5 of Adventure Time that has always stuck with me. Our protagonist, Finn, had recently gone through his first breakup, an event in which he had done some things that he probably shouldn't have. His actions had forced him to start having some uncomfortable inward looks at himself, putting him into a bit of a funk. His brother, Jake, decides to take him to check out a dungeon, something that Finn typically loves to do, in the hopes of snapping him out of it. On the way to their destination, they encounter this weird train dungeon instead, and Finn immediately gets sucked into clearing it. At first, Jake is happy to see his brother seemingly snap out of his funk, suddenly rejuvenated and back to his old self, but as the day wears on, Jake begins to grow uneasy about the situation until finally this exchange happens.
Finn, I think we should take off. I think this place is bad news for you.
Man, no way. All this feels good. Like my inside voice is saying, hey, keep it up. This is good stuff. Hey! Yeah! Like when you made those biscuits way back, and I kept eating them until they were all gone. Like that.
Finn, I made those biscuits with so much butter. You were just responding to the butter. This whole place is butter.
Yeah!
Don't get me wrong, butter is not inherently bad. In fact, I love butter as much as the next guy. Biscuits, cookies, and pastries are delicious, but consider the following. Suppose you're stranded in a desert 15 miles from the nearest town and you have to pick between a dry biscuit of hardtack or a flaky, buttery croissant. Sure, you'll probably need to choke the biscuit down, but it'll give you the calories to make it to safety, while the croissant might end up just being a really delicious last meal. In the wake of our modern media landscape, I have found that this metaphor has become a useful tool for me to articulate my criticisms at media that I consume, so at the risk of ruining my ability to write non-repetitive critiques about anything ever again, I would like to present this as a media criticism device and provide a few examples of how I would utilize it. I am fully aware that this seems to boil down to a distinction of style versus substance, but I believe that the framework I am proposing here provides a more visceral sense of the meaning rather than the sterile terms of these concept names, and thus works on a slightly more nuanced level. As a base case example of this analogy in media criticism, I would liken a textbook, instructional video, or a wiki page to that of a biscuit baked entirely dry with little to no butter. Consuming this media enables you to process a high density of information and ideas, but there is no flavor in its delivery or its presentation. On the other hand, TikToks and other short-form vertical videos would roughly verge on just being vaguely biscuit-shaped blocks of butter. They massage your brain in a way that feels good, yet you wouldn't even be able to recall what you had just seen after 2 more swipes down. In terms of anime, I would say something like the original 1995 Ghost in the Shell film or Serial Experiments Lain would err on the side of having a higher biscuit-to-butter ratio, while something like Make Heroine or Tamako Market would err on having a higher butter-to-biscuit ratio. While I've only given you some exemplars and no formal definitions, you may already be able to see what the vibe of what I'm trying to go for. That being said, this does not straightforwardly mean that a higher butter-to-biscuit ratio is inherently worse. After all, a piece of media is a deal between the creator and the audience. The creator gets to express themselves, and in exchange for listening for what they have to say, the audience is entitled to receive some sort of fulfillment from that interaction. If what the creator puts out is boring, offensive, or redundant, the audience has no reason to engage with that creation at all. This is where this analogy needs some nuance introduced. Let's start with the biscuit first. The flour of the biscuit contains macronutrients mandatory for the human body to perform its basic processes. Any human could eat this dry biscuit and extract the same amount of nutritional benefit, all while roughly having the same level of enjoyment as it tastes like basically nothing. In media, the analog of these foundational macronutrients is the core underlying themes that resonate with the human experience, like themes and motifs of the hero's journey, the value of human connection, and the tragedy of conflict. While central to the human experience, these themes on their own can come off as overly high-minded or sterile or boring. To bring some flavor or je ne sais quoi to the biscuit, the author can use some butter to make the underlying message a little more palatable. In cooking, butter is rarely the star of the dish, rather it is a flavor or texture enhancer. That's what gives the flakiness to your biscuit or the shininess to your pan sauces. Let's take Neon Genesis Evangelion as an example. One of the core messages of this biscuit is the message that it is inherently brave to choose to continue living because conscious existence has intrinsic value. On a purely factual or logical basis, this is an incredibly challenging stance to argue. After all, there's actually no factual proof that this claim is true. The creator could have gone through hundreds of sleepless nights and agonizing periods of introspection to arrive at this conclusion and believe it in their bones, but their inherent values and beliefs are just electrical signals bouncing around in their gray matter. However, if they instead reframe this message into an epic story featuring giant robots, evocative Christian adjacent imagery, attractive character designs, and military geek bait, they might have a higher chance of getting their point across. I refer to these aspects of Evangelion as the butter to its biscuit because they are just means to an end of conveying the core underlying message. Whether or not the angels explode into crosses or hearts doesn't ultimately matter a whole lot when it comes to the theme of self-actualization, nor does the fact that the female pilots need to wear skin-tight plug suits to pilot their robots. This isn't to say that these elements are not intentional creative decisions on the part of the creator, but they are more so chosen because of the creator's proclivities rather than in service of the underlying message of the work. That being said, you can always just smear a bunch of butter onto a cracker to enhance its flavor and texture in the same way that you can spam explosions, member berries, and boobies on screen in an effort to elevate your audience's engagement. But the more adept a creator is at their craft, the better they are able to interweave their indulgences with their underlying messages, thus better incorporating their butter into their biscuit. For instance, why is Unit 001 purple? Because it looks cool, right? Well, if you take a step back, you might notice that the field version of Unit 000 is blue and that Unit 002 is red, purple's primary components. Suddenly, Unit 001's color theme doesn't seem so arbitrary, does it? But why is Unit 000 blue and why is Unit 002 red? Well, Rei, Unit 000's pilot, has blue hair to visually accentuate her as someone with a cool and emotionless personality, content to roll over and do whatever anyone tells her to do. Asuka, Unit 002's pilot, has red hair to accentuate her loud, boisterous, and fiery personality as someone who actively takes pride in her ability to work as a pilot. Well, so what? What does this have to do with the central underlying decision of deciding that life is worth living? Well, just about everything. Asuka and Rei are foils to each other and pilot the Eva for opposite reasons. As Shinji's only consistent peers, they epitomize the two extremes of answering the question, should you choose to continue living? Eva 001 being purple symbolizes that Shinji occupies a middle ground between these two extremes and foreshadows the final decision that he has to make regarding the Human Instrumentality Project. Could these core underlying themes be conveyed with the robots being arbitrary colors? Of course. Did it enhance Skynex's ability to sell toys, posters, and buckets? Maybe, but the ability for this level of depth to be teased out of something innocuous, like the robot's paint jobs, serves more as an example of how buttery stylistic flourishes can tie in with the nitty-gritty, biscuity substance of the story. To those of you currently rolling their eyes at this line of reasoning and telling me to stop asking why the curtains are blue, you are exactly the people that I think should try adopting this framework for discussing media. While it is true that creators can thoughtlessly include non-essential details in their work, they can also just not include them. For instance, I'm currently attempting to make this point over an instrumental cover of MF Doom's Rhymes Like Dimes. My point could totally be made over any other song, Pure Silence, or even Forks on Plates, but I like MF Doom and he ad-libs about buttery biscuits in the outro of the song. Thus, in order to indulge both my personal tastes and enhance the core content of my video, I've deigned to intentionally include it at the risk of being DMCA'd. This is just a tiny example, but I think dismissing such lines of inquiry is fundamentally anti-intellectual and reductive towards our ability to appreciate art on a more than surface level. To summarize, the biscuit is the core underlying message of a work, while the butter is any other set dressing of the work meant to make the underlying message more palatable. Please note that the butter could be included in service of indulging the whims of the creator, i.e. Anno adding crosses everywhere because he thought they looked cool, but they can also be added in service of the audience, i.e. adding a cameo of a fan-favorite character despite them having no thematic or narrative weight in the work. The final nuance of this critical framework is the fact that different kinds of people will respond to different kinds of butter. While everyone's body responds roughly the same to the intake of raw calories, enjoyment of different types of butter may vary from person to person. For instance, if you're a mechanically inclined person, the mechanical design considerations of how a massive gun of an Ava is moved when the robot is not active may be incredibly fascinating. If you are not, this flourish would end up meaning very little. If you are unfamiliar with a character, their cameo means very little to you. This final nuance enables this framework to be customized on a person-to-person basis. Based on these definitions, I posit the two following claims. 1. For a piece of media to be a meaningful piece of art, it must contain a significant component of biscuit, but it is not necessarily absent of butter. 2. For a piece of media to be meaningful to you, you should be able to point to its underlying biscuit and articulate why it resonated with you. And with that, our critical framework is complete. Note, this framework enables you to criticize the work both on their butter and their biscuit. To show how this trivializes media criticism, here is a rapid-fire list of my personal takes to demonstrate how this generalizes across different mediums, not just anime. This framework is admittedly still very vibes-based, but I believe that it is becoming more important than ever to be able to separate the butter from the biscuit in the media that we consume. I felt that all of the reviews and discussions around any piece of creative work have slowly turned into a mush of noise. Videos that are hours long will come out mercilessly condemning or endlessly praising something, yet they just end up boiling down to snarky retellings of what happened in the work, comparisons to other similar works, or just banal lists of individual things that they did or did not like.
Just fantastic. No. Fantastic.
For all the hours of footage and miles of spilled ink, people are still unable to properly articulate how something did or did not resonate with them. Now, before you accuse me of being elitist saying that people can't enjoy things, they also need to be good at it, consider the incentive structure at play here. As previously mentioned, a piece of media is a deal between the creator and the audience. A creator gets to be heard by an audience, but in exchange they must provide some sort of fulfillment to said audience. Creators create out of a desire to express something that they feel, believe, or think is worth sharing. However, since those are intangible things at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that can't be eaten or imbibed, most people will need some sort of other incentive to create. In our current system, that incentive is money. This means that whatever creative work is able to generate the most money will be what is most readily created. Since it takes time, money, and energy to create anything, creators need to find a way to fulfill their end of the media bargain in the most economically efficient way. And the way to pull that off? Slather on that butter, baby.
Another law.
There is an argument to be made that our current day and age is the most creative time in all of history. More music, film, text, and images are being created in any odd day in 2025 than entire years in antiquity. Fight scenes get flashier, soundtracks get richer, and dialogue gets quippier. Yet, despite this embarrassment of riches, our souls as consumers remain unsatiated. All of this butter certainly tastes good in the moment in the theater, but it only takes a few carward steps in the parking lot afterward to forget it all. As the excitement melts away, your soul emerges, still fundamentally unfulfilled. Simply continuing to consume more media will not lead to satiation. It is only after thinking about why you reacted the way you did to a certain work, after separating the butter from the biscuit, that you can truly identify the root of your dissatisfaction. With the rise of generative models and AI image generation, the need for this level of critical thinking becomes even more urgent. What these models have essentially done is mapped all of the axes of humanity's buttery surface level affinities onto a mathematical distribution that can be sampled at will by an equation. In other words, whatever kind of butter you like, be it anime girls, giant robots, rap music, or even ancient Tang Dynasty poetry, are now just points on a graph. Unless we can begin to think of media in terms of their components of butter and biscuit, we as the audience lack the nuance to demand more from the creators we patronize. Since these models produce this stuff for dirt cheap relative to the traditional creative process, our inability to demand more will only lead to most, if not all, media becoming nothing but butter. Please note that it is still okay to like things that other people don't like. It is a sign of healthy discourse for two people to disagree about the handling or meaning of a biscuit. Some people like wheat, and some people like rye. What's important is the ability to articulate why you feel this way, and critically assess whether you enjoyed the biscuit because it actually relit the fire of your soul, or because it was just made with heaping mounds of butter.